Good evening from Auschwitz in southern Poland, and the gate that marks the entrance to main camp here with the notorious words Arbeit macht frei, work will set you free. Of course, this was where so many were imprisoned and murdered, and where commemorations have been held to mark 80 years since the liberation of this concentration and extermination camp established by the Nazis in the Second World War. And I'm standing here by the electric fence that surrounded the camp, a place of such immense suffering and cruelty that has become a symbol of the Holocaust. An estimated 1.1 million people died here, making it the site of the largest mass execution of human beings ever recorded. 1 million were Jews, the other victims largely Polish, Roma and Soviet prisoners of war. Throughout the day, ceremonies have been taking place. Around 50 survivors of the camp returned to lay wreaths and candles, and some spoke powerfully of their experiences here. Leaders from all over the world, including the King, were in attendance. Commemorations have also been taking place elsewhere, including in London, and we'll have more on that a little later. But first, our Europe editor Katya Adler begins our coverage with the events that took place here today, 80 years on from liberation.
Auschwitz-Birkenau, where more than 1 million were murdered. A horror mourned and remembered today.
And then we were stripped of all our humanity. First, we were stripped naked and robbed of all our personal belongings. This Nazi concentration camp symbolizes the unprecedented cruelty in the treatment of people throughout history.
Sharing his painful memories and more. 50 other Nazi camp survivors, most from Auschwitz. Their presence here so many years later, some alongside family members, in itself a victory against the Nazis, who so desired to wipe them out. These blue and white striped uniforms they're wearing, a memory of the lice-infested camp clothes they once were forced to wear.
As all my little friends were rounded up and driven to their deaths, while the heartbreaking cries of their parents fell on deaf ears.
Listening intently and paying their respects, the King and members of other European royal families, President Macron and Zelensky. His fellow Ukrainians helped liberate Auschwitz 80 years ago, alongside Russian soldiers. Vladimir Putin wasn't invited here now because of his invasion of Ukraine. Gassed and shot, starved and tortured, viewed as vermin to be eliminated.
The
names of the death camps are mentioned in this prayer. Survivors too pray for a better future, that we should learn lessons from their past.
We are also here to proclaim and to pledge that we will never, never, ever allow history to repeat itself.
But the Holocaust didn't start here in Auschwitz. It began with everyday hate, on everyday streets. The kind we're seeing increasingly on social media and in politics now.
Good morning.
That's why Holocaust survivor Marla Trebich spends so much time in schools.
What can happen when a civilization breaks down? And we've seen what Hitler did and what it resulted in.
She wants to warn them to be vigilant.
It's better to hear from a witness than just reading off a sheet of information.
There's always going to be a struggle in standing up for what's right, but if it's the right thing to do, then you should definitely go for it.
Did it make you think about discrimination today?
Yeah, there's still racism and there's still people that carry on these sort of beliefs today. It's just, it's horrific when you think about it.
Here in Auschwitz, Mala Trebic was carrying a great responsibility. She was the sole UK survivor representing all others at today's commemoration.
We are here to remember, but I remember them all the year round, every year, because I've experienced it, and it's very important for me to be here.
This year's commemoration of the liberation of Auschwitz is seen as particularly significant. Possibly the last big anniversary these eyewitnesses will be alive to remind us what we need to remember and to warn us what we're already in danger of forgetting. Katya Adler, BBC News, Auschwitz.
Well, as we saw there, King Charles attended today's ceremony and later visited Auschwitz main camp, just a few yards from where I'm standing. He laid a wreath and he was visibly moved. Earlier in the day, he spoke to a group of Auschwitz survivors in Krakow and told them the responsibility of remembrance rests on our shoulders, adding, we should never again be a bystander in the face of violence and hate. And in London, the Prince and Princess of Wales met Holocaust survivors at a memorial event. Our senior royal correspondent Daniela Relph reports on the role of the royals today.
In the darkness, a torch lighting his path. As King Charles became the first British monarch to visit Auschwitz, being here in person mattered to him. To see a place of such suffering with his own eyes, its brutality laid bare. Inside Block 5, accompanied by an experienced Auschwitz guide, the king viewed the piles of shoes, a painful reminder of lives lost. Earlier in Krakow, the king met Holocaust survivors at a Jewish community centre he supported over the years.
God save the king!
And are you keeping reasonably well?
Yes, I try. I do my best to keep well.
And he spoke to them about the burden and the power of remembrance.
The act of remembering the evils of the past remains a vital task. And in so doing, we inform our present and shape our future.
That collective duty to remember is a message the king has brought with him to Auschwitz. This is no ordinary royal engagement. Those close to the king say it is a deeply personal pilgrimage for him, something he has found poignant and profound. In London, the Prince and Princess of Wales paid their respects on Holocaust Memorial Day. It too was an event filled with emotion. A reunion with several Holocaust survivors they'd met before. Some they described as old friends, whose stories they said they would never forget. But it was the king's final act at Auschwitz, where his feelings were at their most visible. At the side of Block 11, he laid a wreath at the death wall, where those condemned were executed. The king's face etched with pain at what had happened here. And as he walked away, he stopped to look back, tearful and reflective. Like so many who have visited, its impact stays with you. Daniela Relph, BBC News, Auschwitz.
Most Auschwitz survivors are now in their 80s and 90s and could not make today's ceremony. One of those is Susan Pollack, who lost more than 50 relatives in the Holocaust and was herself sent to Auschwitz when she was just 13 years old. I went to meet Susan in North London, where she now lives, and she began by telling me about the day in 1944 when the Nazis arrived at her home in Hungary and told the family to prepare to leave.
They said, "We'll take you somewhere safe. Tomorrow morning we'll come for you." The police came for us. We were ready. I was a little girl. We were so obedient. We got into this train full of little children, chock-block full. We were on top of each other and we were fearful. We weren't people anymore. The fear absolutely absorbed us. And children were dying and left there.
And you saw that?
I saw that. Babies were dying. As we realized, are we going to survive?
And you had no idea where you were going. When you arrived at Auschwitz, what happened there?
When we finally arrived, there was a voice, still speaking Hungarian, approached us and says, and I remember it very clearly, "Don't say you're younger than 15 years old."
At Auschwitz, younger children were often taken straight to the gas chambers. And that's what kept you alive?
That's what kept me alive.
What about your mother? What happened to her?
I learned later she was sent to the gas chamber.
Straight away?
She was no use. That's the reason. No use for doing any work. She was an elderly woman, heartbroken.
And what was going through your mind, Susan? I mean, there you were a young child.
My mind wasn't functioning. We can't retaliate against such violence. I suppose we wouldn't have minded dying there and there. We were not human beings anymore. We were just worse than animals. Hope, all that disappeared.
What was daily life like for you in the weeks that you were at Auschwitz?
We had to stand in front of Dr. Mengele.
Dr. Mengele, who conducted the horrific experiments on adults and on children. You had to stand naked?
Naked. He had to see those who were losing weight rapidly. Gas chamber.
Looking back, what do you think about the people, the guards at Auschwitz, that kept you in such horrific conditions?
When freedom finally appeared, there was no revenge. We walked away and wondered, how do I make a living in this world?
Do you fear for the future?
Sadly, anti-Semitism is not disappeared. It's not gone. Do not forget. Do not forget. Very important.
The remarkable Susan Pollack talking there. Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviet Red Army, but the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin, was not invited to the ceremony here because of his country's invasion of Ukraine. Instead, he attended commemorations to mark the 81st anniversary of the lifting of the siege of Leningrad. Up to 1 million people died during the Nazi blockade of the city, now known, of course, as St. Petersburg. But President Putin issued a statement saying the Red Army's liberation of Auschwitz revealed to mankind the truth of the Nazis' crimes. Our Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, has been looking at how the Holocaust is remembered in Russia.
This monument near St. Petersburg encapsulates, I think, how Russia today views the Holocaust. It's quite new. It was only unveiled last year, actually on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, although the focus here is not the Holocaust itself, even though more than 1 million Soviet Jews were murdered by the Nazis. It's called the Monument to Soviet Civilians who fell victim to the Nazi genocide. More and more I hear Russian officials using the phrase, the Nazi genocide of the Soviet people, shifting the focus away from the Holocaust to how the Soviet people as a whole suffered in the Second World War. And they did suffer. More than 27 million Soviet citizens were killed in what's known here as the Great Patriotic War. And this monument reminds us of the great suffering during the 900-day siege of Leningrad. But this refocusing feels like part of an effort by the authorities to present Russia and Russians as victims, not just in the past, but also in the present, even in the light of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and as Russia continues the war there. Because of the war in Ukraine, Russian officials weren't invited to the Auschwitz commemoration, even though it was the Red Army that liberated the camp, the 27th of January later becoming International Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Steve Rosenberg reporting there. Our Europe editor Katya Adler is with me. Katya, you were watching the ceremony, as was I. It was intensely moving. But of course, with the number of survivors dwindling, we may not see the like of that kind of ceremony here again.
It was really moving, Fiona, and of course we had all of those dignitaries. The King was here, representatives from more than 50 countries, but our eyes were on the survivors. We were watching their faces, we were listening to their words, and we heard their pain. And you know what it's like when you speak to survivors about their experiences in the Holocaust. It's really, really difficult to talk about, and that's even if you're on your sofa at home. Imagine what it's like coming back here to the place where you suffered all of that loss, humiliation, deep agony and pain, trauma, really. So why do they do it? They do it because they want us to listen. Holocaust Memorial Day, they're here in Auschwitz and we are watching and we are talking about them, and they have a big message to deliver. Number one, never again. But looking at how fragile they see, they told us today our societies are, it's also be vigilant, because the Holocaust, they say, didn't begin here in Auschwitz. It began with everyday discrimination and rejection of the other. And they want us to listen. The fact that there were only 50 of them here today isn't because they don't care. It's because they're in their 80s and their 90s and they are beginning to pass away. But as long as they are here and they're talking to us, their message does come across loud and clear. But the question is how long that message will live on when they are gone.
Katya, thank you very much. Well, today here at Auschwitz has been a day of great emotion, sombre reflection, and I have to say more than a few tears shed for the millions who died during the Holocaust, more than 1 million here. We've heard from some of the 50 survivors, as Katya was saying, they're dwindling in number, increasingly frail, but whose testimony was undiminished in its power. And here in the dark and the cold, Auschwitz feels like a place of ghosts and memories. Memories that the survivors are determined must never be forgotten.